On today's episode of Locked On Wild, stop the presses. Yakov Trenin scored not once, but twice.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we recap an eventful weekend for the Minnesota Wild. Take a look at a strong game against the Anaheim Ducks and another game against a team in the West that the Wild just can't get at this point in the season. We'll talk about if there is need for concern in that regard. We'll also give some love to Marco Rossi, who continues to just cruise along for this Minnesota Wild team. And Yakov Trenin got his first and second goal of the season, so we'll talk about that today as well. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, and we're going to count it since the Minnesota Vikings just took the Atlanta Falcons out behind the shed and mule kicked them a couple times. So we're going to count it as a victory Micheletti Monday. Unfortunately, the Wild came up short against the Los Angeles Kings once again. But Alex, the Wild are still at the top of the Central Division. Winnipeg had a weird game too. So I guess, the Wild are having games that are, I guess I would say problematic, but it's happening to the Jets way more frequently than it did at the beginning of the season. So at the end of the day, still on track, still on course. Nothing is derailed. It's just frustrating at this point. I think that these games continue to happen against Dallas, Winnipeg, and now the Los Angeles Kings.
Yeah, what's most frustrating, and we kind of talked about it a little bit off air, is come playoff time, you have to beat these teams, and so it's a cause for concern that it's happening in the regular season, but now they have a great chance at doing some damage in the playoffs with the amount of points that they've banked so far in the season to get into the playoffs. And they're going to have to go through with how the playoff format is set up is to play your division rivals. So it's it's going to be interesting when the time comes for that.
If the playoff format was 1v8, maybe it's not a bad thing. Because the Wild would currently right now play the Colorado Avalanche, which I don't know how I feel about that. It's an Avalanche team that obviously is a mess, but if you go with the standard format, the Wild, I think the Wild would play the Avalanche either way. So maybe it's not the worst thing, but yeah, so let's just look at this a little bit, because I was talking with some people on social media about this, and I tweeted out that it's becoming a thing. And I thought about it over the course of yesterday. And so we can take one of the games against the Jets. I'm comfortable taking one of the games against the Jets off the board because Connor Hellebuyck had one of the best goalie performances of the season. And the Wild pretty thoroughly dominated the rest of the game. So I'm willing to take that one off the board. But you look at what happened in the other two games against the Kings, in the game against Dallas, and the other game against the Winnipeg Jets. I think what we're seeing is that these teams just have defensive forwards and defensemen in general a defensive style that they can deploy against the Kirill Kaprizov line and take them out of the equation. I think that's the big reason that you're seeing these teams consistently beat the Wild, is because they have options to be able to do it, and the Wild just have not had a counterpunch through these matchups yet.
Yeah, and now it's even more, now that Kirill's with Boldy. So then when you're playing some really good defensive teams, there really hasn't been much of a second line. So yeah, the injuries are really starting to hurt. They need Ek back in the worst way out of all the injuries, just because he's so important.
Yeah, and I talked about this last week, so the everydayers, they know this already, but in a weird way, I wasn't as worried about the Jonas Brodin injury just because the defense as a whole is playing so well. The offense, you can't pull pieces off that offense right now because you don't have a ton to begin with. And both of the Kings games were close until the final 5 minutes, and then you get the empty netters. So it's not like they're not getting run off the arena like they did last year and the year before. So this is a long process. This is a drawn out process to try to get back on top of these teams like Dallas and the Los Angeles Kings and Winnipeg and even Colorado, who the Wild have not played yet this year. It's a long process, and the way that you flip things into your favor is by first getting it to where the games are close, and that's how you flip a couple your way. And so I know it's frustrating that the Wild have not beaten any of those teams yet. There are still opportunities as the season unfolds, but they are making progress towards beating those teams. It's just a matter of getting scoring outside of those top guys.
Yeah. What are they going to do here? They're going to have to make some big adjustments. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's going to take somebody going nuts, like Marcus Foligno having the 2-goal game, or Ryan Hartman having a hat trick, or something along those lines that you just don't expect, because the expectations right now are that you're going to get 1 or 2 goals a night from Kaprizov, Rossi, Boldy. That's the expectation going forward, and it's not going to be a number that you hit all the time. And right. In the instances in which you don't, then that means you got to get 2 or 3 goals from your bottom 9, which is basically that's basically how it's split up right now. You've got your top line and your bottom 9. I wanted to do it that way because I wanted it to rhyme. But then you look at the second line too. I don't know. This is a team that is still built to prevent goals more so than it is to score them. But you still got to be able to score.
Yeah.
In order to continue to keep on the points pace that they've been on the last start of the season so far.
Yeah, I mean, the goalies have been they've been doing everything they can, but it puts so much pressure on them to, when you're not scoring more than 2 or 3, and teams are going to get more and more physical now with Kaprizov too, because he's the main cog. There's all the skill level except for Boldy is and Rossi is really non-existent right now on the team. You have a lot of grinders, and so that's without Ek and Zuccarello, it's taken a major hit.
Yeah. And I think one of the areas, and I said this, I think, a week ago, I think one of the areas that we're starting to notice Zuccarello's absence most is just in the spacing and the playmaking and the ice vision that he brings to the table. It seems like things are way more like compacted and bunched with this team when they do get the puck into the offensive zone. And honestly, I said this in the game Friday against the Ducks, like that first period went just about how I expected it would. Is it took the team a little while to kind of figure out how the offense looked moving forward, but once they did, they did just fine.
Yeah, and you can take advantage against teams like the Ducks, right? Or it's just we were both joking on X. They were waving the white flag early against the Wild. That team is a major train wreck right now.
They are really bad, like beyond awful, to the point that their head coach is basically saying, "Can we get any players on this team that can play?"
Right.
Yeah, it's dicey.
Paul Zegras does get hurt now too. So
I saw that, and I don't know if that's an Achilles or a knee or what that injury is, but that is not good.
The beat writers from Anaheim were saying he was in a walking boot, so they said,
they don't
expect to see him for quite a while again.
He's going to be out for a while. Well, thankfully, the Wild don't have to worry about trying to fill that type of a hole on the roster. They've got enough holes to fill, and thankfully, one player in particular has stepped in to help with the offense and is actually on pace for what would be an incredibly solid season for him. We'll talk about Marco Rossi taking yet another step forward this season as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. The longest part of the process was the time spent on hold waiting to break up with your current provider. To get started, head to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. There you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile, and you'll get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. $45 upfront payment required. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is also brought to you by Game Time. As we cruise through the winter sports season, there are plenty of opportunities for you to beat the winter weather and see your favorite teams in action at your favorite arenas, whether it be the Minnesota Timberwolves at Target Center, the Minnesota Wild at the XL Energy Center, or the Minnesota Vikings putting the hurt on Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons at US Bank Stadium. Game Time can make your ticket buying experience as stress-free as possible. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We'll have a second episode for you today, diving into the David Jiricek trade a little bit more. Reached out to Locked On NHL Prospects, and turns out they did a little recap of the trade and talked about Jiricek at length. So we will have that for a second episode for you, and we'll react to what we hear from the fellows at Locked On NHL Prospects. So tune in for that coming later today. Then at 8 p.m. tonight, Denny's got another live show lined up and ready to rock for you, going through potential trade targets for the Minnesota Wild, and not big contracts that you'd have to cut off an arm and a leg to try to fit onto the books. Free agent targets. So make sure to tune in at 8 p.m. tonight for all the festivities, as we find a way to inject some life into this Minnesota Wild offense. Speaking of injecting some life into this Minnesota Wild offense, Alex, Marco Rossi has been stepping it up a little bit. He scored against the Anaheim Ducks, and as of right now, he's third on the team in goals with 9, third on the team in points with 24. His new pace for this season, because he plays every game, he never misses a game, literally never misses a game. His new pace for the upcoming season has him at 27 goals, 43 assists, 70 points in a full 82-game season, and 6 power play goals, 15 power play points. If he could hit that number, that's a guy that is going to get paid when his new deal eventually comes about.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting because, like we talk about, there continues to just be rumors of not fully in on long term here, but I think that must be fueling him too, because his play has jumped tremendously playing with Kirill and Boldy here. The other night against Anaheim, it was men amongst boys, and I mean, he's feeding the puck. I mean, he's and other coaches have pointed out for how small, his size. He gets in there. He gets in the corner. He battles, and his skating working with Andy Ness has paid off over the summer. I mean, the kid missed his sister's wedding. I mean, he was dedicated to get better, and it's paying off now. And he wants to get paid like Seth Jarvis. He wants to get paid like Anton Lundell. These guys that were in his draft class. He missed a year of hockey basically from the myocarditis, from the long COVID stuff, and now it's really, really cool to see him shine. He's not a bust.
No, and you talked about it. He's 5'9", but he does not play like 5'9". He plays much bigger than that, and he is, other than Joel Eriksson Ek, he's the best player on this team at getting to the net, and he is one of 3 Wild players currently over 20 points, and he's the next closest player to getting to the double-digit goal party. Whenever that happens, he'll get to 10 goals, and this was a guy who his numbers last year, like they ended up pretty solid, but he did have some quiet spells. Not all his fault, just due to that. Once Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson Ek got put together, the scoring dried up for the rest of the team. But it's great to see him be able to step into a key role as a top line guy, and some of these other numbers too. His faceoff percentage right now is just a tick under 50%. He was at 44.7 last year. So he has bumped that faceoff percentage up substantially this year, and he's playing a career high in minutes. He's shooting a career high 19% so far this season. There's a lot to like, and I did see on X a theory in Wild Twitter as to why he has not been signed yet, other than the one that draws all the headlines, in that the Wild coaching staff just doesn't, they don't believe that it's, sustainable or substantial. I think it's Joseph Nowariak, I think, was the one that was mentioning this. I'm wondering if the Wild are just waiting for the rest of their extensions coming up until they get a ballpark as to where Kaprizov's going to slot in on his deal.
No, that's 100%. And it's the same thing. If Bill wants to make a move at the deadline too, they gotta keep in mind how much they are going to have to open up the pocketbook for Kaprizov, because it seems like he's going to want McDavid, Ovechkin, Matthews money. It's going to probably 14, 15 a year. And so that's going to be a whopper of a deal. And so if you try to make a trade, it seems like they're going to have to go the one guy that's on the last year of his deal to see if they can make a run for the Cup.
And this is where all the cap stuff gets interesting, because as we've discussed, there's a good amount of the Parise Suter money going into upcoming extensions. So you're not going to have $14.7 million to spend, but the number that's going to be key in determining what you have to spend free agency wise is how much the cap goes up. And if the cap goes up $8 or $9 million this year, which is rumored to potentially be a possibility, that's money that you have not accounted for. That's when you get a check in the mail that you had not put into your budget, and you're like, hey, this money is not going to my crippling credit card debt or 90 years of student loan payments. I can go spend this on something. That's going to be how the Wild add an impact piece in the offseason. The 14.7 is going to be to get players on the books, contract extension signed, get Kaprizov's extension on the books, because I know it's a trendy buzz topic, but I'm not concerned at this point about Rossi getting re-signed. I just don't see a way that you can weather that hit of deciding that he just is not, worthwhile part of this team. And it's not even that necessarily. I get 100% what the talker is because he's 5'9". If he was 6'3", he'd be signed already. Like, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. It's just you can't have as many short kings as the Wild do. And so that's the reason that his status has been floated as much as it has. Because if you have the opportunity to get somebody that's 6'4", 6'5", then that would put you in a better position, I guess, to win. But I think if Rossi was going to get traded, I think it would have already happened.
Yeah. They, it's that rumors. It seems like it's just it will continue for forever, even if he is signed.
Yeah.
Well, if he only gets a bridge deal too, because then it can just live on the infamous bridge deals. But there's also a joke around the NHL where it's either you get the bridge or you get the 8-year extension or whatever, 7 years. That's been happening.
Well, we do know he's not going to get a 15-year, $765 million contract because those only happen in baseball. So congratulations to the New York Mets on that one. Although the last time the Mets signed a mega deal like that, didn't it fall through because of medical records?
Yes.
Wait, the Twins were involved in that. I don't know. That's enough. That's enough about baseball. It's an insane amount of money, and I feel like it's worth noting that $765 just went to one guy. Like that's value of entire teams right there. And I could think of a few things that I'd purchase with that much money if I had it. But we will finish today's episode of Locked On Wild by taking a look at the upcoming schedule and things to keep in mind as the Minnesota Wild continue to cruise through the schedule. We'll talk about all that as we return after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. If you're watching the Minnesota Vikings game yesterday and you've got the inkling to try your hands at some of the various bets that FanDuel has to offer, hopefully you took the over. Hopefully you took the Minnesota Wild to cover handily, because they had Falcons defensive backs so lost. They were looking the wrong way in coverage. They were falling down like they were walking on ice. It was a mess, but the Vikings definitely took advantage, and you certainly can as well if you head to FanDuel.com to join today, because you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We are going to be rolling with some big guests coming up here over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. Starting to finally get into a nice routine, which means that we can start to bring in some guests to help us talk about the start of the season so far. And one other thing that we can talk about on a positive note, Alex, Yakov Trenin no longer has a goose egg in the goals category, because not only did he score against the Anaheim Ducks on an empty netter, with the Ducks pulling the goalie for an extra attacker, which, by the way, do you think anybody had a more miserable time in that game than John Gibson?
Oh, God.
Especially because
help.
I used the gif of Velma from Scooby-Doo trying to find her glasses, because he was not tracking the puck at all. Like he may as well have been trying to find like a needle in the Midwest. It was just a total mess of an adventure. And so then Anaheim at the end of the game was like, we got to try to get some goals. And Yakov Trenin's like, I'll get the goal. And then he scored against the Los Angeles Kings too.
Right. For the Ducks, that's gotta feel miserable. But yeah. And Kemper was trying to get a shutout. Whoops. When you have Trenin scoring on you. But the Kings didn't affect him.
I wonder what his projection now. So he's got 3 points in 27 games, 2 goals and an assist. But we've talked about this, and I'm going to try to do a better job to point it out, because it does bear repeating that he is statistically one of the hardest players to score on in 5-on-5. So he has been doing he's been doing his job.
Yeah.
He didn't come here to score a ton of goals. He's on pace for 6 right now, but now that he finally has gotten the first and the second, the hope being that will help ignite the bottom 6.
Right.
That's the route that I kind of want to go with this, because that bottom 6 they have not been scoring a ton this season, and a full, fresh, new fourth line playing the best game that fourth line has played in a long time against the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, you'd hope that they would play well because they would play, but they just haven't seen a ton of production from the fourth line in particular, and that was a big problem last year too.
Yeah, 100%. I was trying to make the joke. Will Ferrell, we're going streaking now. He's gotten goals in a couple of games in a row. But yeah, I mean, those are the teams that can, they always call it a get right game. But so maybe that has given them some momentum, and then carrying it into, what was going to be a lot of people call it a scheduled loss on a back-to-back.
I called it that.
Yeah, against a tough, Kings defensive, the style they play. It's they can just shut things down when they have a lead. Yeah, it's not fun hockey to watch all the time.
Speaking of not fun hockey, 4 games on the schedule this week, including Tuesday against the Utah Hockey Club at 8:30 p.m. I will attempt to make it through that game, but we'll see. Now, for those that maybe are not in the loop as to why I was so vocally angry about the Florida Panther game on December 18th, my workday now starts at 5:30 a.m. So if the game starts at 8:30 or when it's a national game, 9, yeah, I'm not getting through the game. I'm just not.
Yeah.
So
those late home ones, it's like, what are we doing here in the Central?
Yeah, not fun, not ideal. But Utah Hockey Club on Tuesday, and then a nice little homestand here of 5 straight, starting against Edmonton on Thursday. Then Saturday against Philadelphia at 1 p.m.
Oh, another dreaded. Why Philly again? Why do we get Philly for the matinee games? That's interesting.
Well, thankfully for Philadelphia, they are in a bit of a rut, and evidently John Tortorella is going to teach his guys how to dive.
Yes.
After what happened against the Utah Hockey Club and the Boston Bruins and the Florida Panthers. It's a Philly team that's near the bottom of the standings, but they play a bruising defensive style. So keep an eye on that game. Then the Wild will welcome the Vegas Golden Knights to town for the first time this season. Vegas on top in the Pacific. So you got 4 games, 3 of them at home. That's a possibility of 8 points this week. I would like to see the Wild find a way to get a point against Vegas. And it's Philly and Vegas. It's a back-to-back. It's a 1 p.m. and a 5 p.m. game.
God, not ideal.
So let's try for the split. Let's try for the split there. And Utah and Edmonton are both very beatable. Let's try to get 5 out of the 8. 1 more point than half. Let's set that as the bar and see if the Wild can achieve that this year. They're going to, I'm sure, put out a good start against Utah because of what happened against Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. They've done a good job of bouncing back anytime there's been adversity this year. So that doesn't surprise me. They always seem to play well against Edmonton.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's in net there.
Yeah, we'll see without Brodin, but because he's been the nemesis for McDavid, and so we'll see. They're starting to get healthy, but Skinner is such a is such a roller coaster. I don't think Pickard's any good, so if he plays, that it becomes a must win if he's in net, because I don't think he's NHL caliber anymore. So that'll be interesting. And then Vegas looks like a completely different team. They still have Eichel, still have LTIR Stone, but they've lost some really good pieces. Marc Rousseau's not there. Alec Martinez on the back end. So their goaltending's been okay. Samsonov is I don't think is any good. Aiden Hill. He can be, he's such a roller coaster of a goalie too. So some interesting teams this week. Some teams that play a lot of, it's a heavy style. So there's gonna be, physical battles, especially that Philly, Nick Seeler and Delorier if he gets in.
We don't need roads where we're going. If they played that was DeLorean, not Delorier. Sorry, I kid. Well, we'll see what happens here as the week unfolds. But another opportunity for the Wild to keep pace at the top of the Central Division, and that'll do it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure, if you haven't already, to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.